A puzzling parable, this afternoon's gospel. It was drawn from the shabby workaday world. A shifty-eyed steward swindles his employer, manipulates his master's money for himself, and is found out and finds a way out. Jesus uses this unsavory tale as a way to invite us how we are to respond to the crises of life as his disciples. Certainly, the parable connects with the lust for money, but this theme runs its way throughout Luke's gospel. There's more to it here. What struck me is the realism of Jesus. He sees the world as it too often is. Alive with God's presence, yes, but also flawed, broken, vulnerable. And with disarming detachment, almost casually, Jesus weaves a story of a conniving crook without a conscience. We recognize the rogue. He was facing a crisis, and he found a way to wiggle out of it. A way based on self-interest, which was the theme of his life. Now, we all know that that's the way some people live in this world. Quite out for themselves, for all they can get, however they can get it. No matter its effect on other vulnerable people, what's good for me? But that's not the way of Jesus, of the gospel, and it's certainly not the way to prepare for the coming of the kingdom. When we experience crises in our lives, as we most certainly will, when we come up to a brick wall, well, for us as for the unjust steward, there slithers the temptation to think that we are alone. And so, therefore, we are just for ourselves. That's the way up. Self-interest. What's good for me? Not the way of Jesus. As he faced mockery and rejection and misunderstanding and betrayal and cruelty, he lived the way to which he invites us. Patience and trust, and above all, self-giving. No matter what the crisis for Jesus, God is always lovingly present. And the Father allows the wheat and the tares to grow in the field that is the world. God is long-suffering and patient, and that's why he puts up with the likes of you and me. Yet God would not have us be passive in the crises of life, especially those involving justice, the suffering of the dispossessed, the vulnerable. We raise our minds and hearts to search out the ways of justice, as the unjust steward found ways of injustice. For example, there are terrorists who on 9/11 violated us. As disciples of Jesus, we are not to lash out in vengeance, lest we become like the terrorists. As a nation, we face a crisis of poverty for so many, of whom we say we are in community with them. And the Lord challenges us. Oh, are you in community with one another? Well then, remember that wealth has a communal dimension. We are to use it for the good of all. Absolute bedrock gospel teaching. So very contrary to the ethos of the day. The Lord expects us who are his disciples to connect his way to all the crises of life, even war. In the ongoing tragedies in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now in Syria, we hear the Lord's incessant cry, "Peace be with you." Pope Francis, in a public address in St. Peter's Square on Sunday, September the 1st, reflecting in faith on the present crisis in Syria, urged his fellow disciples in this way. Notice how he greets them. Notice how he greets us. Dear brothers and sisters, hello. No exaggerated kind of an opening. Hello. I'm with you. I am your friend. Today, dear brothers and sisters, I wish to add my voice to the cry which rises up with increasing anguish from every part of the world, from every people, from the heart of each person, into the one great family, which is humanity. It is a cry for peace. It is a cry which declares with force, we want a peaceful world. We want to be men and women of peace. And we want in our society torn apart by divisions and conflict that peace break out. War, never again war. Peace is a precious gift which must be promoted and protected. I appeal strongly for peace, an appeal which arises from the deep within me. Never has the use of violence brought peace in its wake. War begets war, violence begets violence. With all my strength, I ask each party in this conflict to listen to the voice of their own conscience, not to close themselves in solely on their own interests, but rather to look at each other as brothers and sisters, and decisively and courageously to follow the path of encounter and negotiation, and so overcome blind conflict. With similar vigor, I exhort the international community to make every effort to promote clear proposals for peace in that country without further delay, a peace based on dialogue and negotiation for the good of the entire Syrian people. May no effort be spared in guaranteeing humanitarian assistance to those wounded by this terrible conflict, in particular those forced to flee and the many refugees in nearby countries. May humanitarian workers charged with the task of alleviating the sufferings of these people be granted access so as to provide the necessary aid. All men and women of goodwill are bound by the task of pursuing peace. I make a forceful and urgent call to the entire Catholic Church and also to every Christian of other confessions, as well as to followers of every religion, and to those brothers and sisters who do not believe. Peace is a good which overcomes every barrier because it belongs to all of humanity. I repeat forcefully, it is neither a culture of confrontation nor a culture of conflict which builds harmony within and between peoples, but rather a culture of encounter and a culture of dialogue. This is the only way to peace. May the plea for peace rise up and touch the heart of everyone so that they may lay down their weapons and let themselves be led by the desire for peace. You know, in yesterday's world, whenever a pope spoke, we were expected to accept it on the word of authority. No longer. No longer. Now we look for wisdom. We look for the wisdom of the gospel. Does what the popes say somehow reflect this Jesus to us? For a people who say they are disciples of Jesus, what theme is more significant than that which springs from the lips of the risen Jesus? Peace be with you. Peace be with you. And so this morning, this afternoon, as we gather in worship of God, in union with Jesus and with one another, and with the whole human family connected throughout the world, we pray for wisdom and courage and living faith, so that in this crisis, as in every other, we bring the way of Jesus to a world that at its best aches for peace and unity and justice.